experience within the building sector. And we've got a couple of other folks who will be helping to teach this class that we'll introduce in just a moment. Actually, right now. So, as I said, my background is sort of in commercial building design and whole building design. I've done a few different projects kind of at all scales of building, and now work a lot on urban planning and infrastructure planning issues. So hopefully looking to bring some of that perspective into this discussion. And we've got one of our other co-instructors with us on the line tonight, Erin Kaminsky, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Erin Kaminsky. I am a professional living in Chicago. I work for a nonprofit called Elevate Energy. We promote smarter energy use for all, and what that means for me is that I work with apartment building owners to audit their homes, figure out retrofits, and help make it happen. I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh about 2 years ago with a degree in chemical engineering, and I've been working in buildings ever since.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Karen. And our third instructor, who will join us for a couple of the lectures later and pop in towards the end of some of our others, is Erin Lennox, who you see pictured here. She had an obligation tonight, so couldn't be here to introduce herself. But Erin got her doctoral degree from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York, and has done a lot of work on buildings and energy, both in the professional world in the United States, as well as looking in developing countries. So she'll bring an interesting perspective, especially later in the course when we discuss alternative building practices and alternative materials. So again, thank you guys for joining us for this course series. This is the first time that we've done this, and we'll hopefully be offering this multiple times in the future. But really what can help make this the best that it can is all of you. So just as a little bit of administrative stuff to go over before we get into the meat, for those who may not have used GoToWebinar for either one of our classes or some of our other activities in the past, this is the format that we'll be using for all of the online classes. What it does is it allows us to not only present to you, but for you to ask questions, raise your hands, and we can unmute anybody if you have a microphone, if you want to ask a question, provide a comment, and we really encourage discussion here. So, as I said, on the right side of your panel here where you've got, I guess you can't see mine, but on the right side of your screen you'll have a little panel that controls GoToWebinar. If you've got a question, you're welcome to click the button that allows you to raise your hand, and we'll see that. And like I said, we can unmute you. If you've got a microphone, you can ask directly. Or as a couple of you have already done, you can type a question into the questions box, and that'll come straight through to us. A couple of other sort of administrative things. This class is 5 weeks long. This is the first week of 5. Next week, Karen's going to be talking about existing buildings, audits, and retrofits. In week 3, I'll be going over energy modeling and whole building design for new buildings, residential and commercial. And then in the 4th week, Erin is going to jump in and talk about alternative building approaches. And then in our last week, we're going to bring in a couple of outside guests who are going to go through some case studies of some really different and novel and still developing energy efficient building theories or building designs on the very small scale with tiny houses, and then really advanced commercial buildings on the other side. So really, we think exciting set of talks. And then in between, we're going to have some readings and activities that you guys can do to help further the education through this class. Nothing is required. You're not getting graded, but if you do attend all the lectures, we get we will provide you with a certificate. Oh, oops, I am not sharing my screen. Sorry about that, guys. Just got some feedback there. There we go. All right. So going over this again, really quickly, week 2 we'll go through audits and retrofits, 3 energy modeling and whole building design, week 4 alternative building approaches, and week 5 tiny homes and super advanced buildings with some guest speakers. So the other, here we go now, there we go. All right, so as I said in the middle, we'll have some readings and activities. It's all optional. You will get a certificate of completion when you finish this class. And then starting next week, we're going to have an optional pre-class discussion each week. And while GoToWebinar is maybe not a perfect format for this, like I said, it allows us to unmute everybody. So especially if you've got a mic and headphones are preferred, we'd love for you to join us. It's a good chance to interact with Karen, Erin, and myself and ask any questions you might have, or just to continue the conversation outside of class. If you cannot make it any given week, that's totally fine. We're recording all of these lectures, and they'll be posted on the YouTube channel, the ESW YouTube channel, as private videos, and so we'll share links with all of the registrants after each week. One more thing that I'll go through. All of you will be added to, or you'll receive a link to, our Google Drive, which has all of our resources. So as you can see, we've got the syllabus online. You can take a little bit more of a look at what's going to be coming in the next weeks, as well as look at what any of the readings might be for the week. And then we'll also post the slides for each week. So you see here we've got the slides for this week already up, and then slides for an activity that we're going to do in the middle of class today. So feel free to check back anytime there or to use those as resources. All of these will be preserved after the class. So as long as you continue to have access to this folder, you can go back anytime and grab those resources. All right, that's enough administrative stuff, I think. So I'm going to pass it over to Karen to get us going on the actual content here.
All right, hi everyone. So first we just wanted to give a really quick overview of what energy use in the US looks like right now. So these charts are kind of showing what the household energy use in the US is like. The one on the left is in 1978, and as you can see, most of the energy there is used for space heating. And then you can look to the right to see the 2006 graph. If you look at them, you can see that they're both using about the same amount of energy, about 10.5 quadrillion BTUs. But increases in energy efficiency have decreased the amount used for space heating. It's been decreased by a little bit over 20%. So the reason that this is still remaining the same is that as energy efficiency improves, all the technology improves, this is negated by lifestyle changes like growing home sizes, increased use of electronics, and you can kind of see how that's happening on the graph on the right. You can see that the average house size has increased a lot over the past 30 or so years, and the average household size has decreased. So really, despite the increased use of energy efficiency for things like heating, cooling, lighting, you're still using about the same amount of energy in homes. Next slide, Rob. So the commercial energy use in the US looks a bit different, but you can see some similar trends, at least with the building size on the right. Here, over half of the energy use is used for space heating and lighting, which is a category you didn't really see in the household sector nearly as much. And as the building size increases, you're going to need to do a lot more space heating and lighting, so those take up an enormous amount of energy. All right, next slide. And Rob's more of a expert on commercial buildings than I am, so Rob, if you have anything to add there.
No, I think the big thing you hit on it for commercial buildings is really the lighting, and especially we get a lot more air conditioning loads in buildings depending on the climate. For homes, it's really heating dominated. For commercial buildings, we start to get into really important determination of cooling loads as well. And so a lot of the interventions that we'll talk about in week 3 for commercial buildings deal not actually with the mechanical systems or the things that consume energy directly, but with a lot of the facade systems, the windows, the insulation, and others that help us regulate the temperature, especially because those do become such an important driver.
Great. So the next thing I'm going to talk about and go into a little bit more detail is a few building rating systems that have been used a lot over the years. The first one you're probably all familiar with is LEED, the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and this is run by the U.S. Green Building Council. So there are a ton of different types of certification available through LEED. You can get it for new construction, for major renovations, interiors, operations, maintenance, and much more. This is done with a point system. You can earn up to 100 points in the 6 categories shown over there on the screen. But you can also get 10 extra points for regional priority, so focusing on issues that matter a lot in your region, like for California, it'd be water. And then you can get an extra 6 points for innovation and design. So to be LEED certified, you have to get 40 to 49 points, and it goes all the way up to platinum with 80 or more points. So this is the original energy efficiency standard. So it kind of set the industry standards. It formalized the process of certification. It's an independent third party, and it pushed the industry to gain knowledge and expertise in environmental impact of buildings. However, it has led to a lot of greenwashing. The point system can be pretty arbitrary. You can get points for things like only adding the minimum number of parking spaces, so it makes it pretty easy to game the system and get at least LEED Silver without really even trying. The other major flaw in this is that LEED is primarily based off of computer models of your building, not how it actually performs. So you might not be using a building in the most efficient way, and you might still be LEED Platinum certified. And it's also a pretty costly thing to achieve, so typically only a larger company can pursue LEED certification. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Energy Star. So you might know Energy Star a little bit better for its appliance ratings. You see it all the time on washers, dryers, dishwashers, and things like that. But it also rates buildings. It does residential homes, new construction, commercial, and most recently they've come up with a score for multifamily apartment buildings. So the Energy Star score that a building receives is out of 100, and that's based on a percentile. So for example, if your building had a score of 75, that would indicate that it performs better than 75% of similar buildings nationwide, like you compare a hospital to all other hospitals or things like that. This certification must be renewed annually, and a new score is assigned based on the previous year's performance. So this is a big change from LEED, is that the fact that it's looking at your actual utility data and how the building actually performs. But if you think about the percentile focus, if all buildings are inefficient, being better than 75% of them, what does that really mean? So there's a little bit of a fudge factor there. And Energy Star is also focused very much on energy and utility data, and it focuses less on softer categories like where the building is located, if it's near public transportation, all those sorts of things. And so then the last one we're going to talk about, which is extremely rigorous, is the Living Building Challenge, which was originally launched by Cascadia Green Building Council, a chapter of USGBC, in 2006, but quickly became its own institute, which is now overseen by the International Living Building Institute. So it has 7 performance categories, some of which are shown on the figure on the right. There are things like energy and water use, materials, but it also focuses a lot on more holistic things like looking at site location. It promotes use of brownfields for redevelopment. It promotes car-free living. This is another one that you have to prove your performance over a 12-month period to get this certification. And it is extremely rigorous. You have to have net zero energy and water. You can't use dangerous materials like asbestos, mercury, PVC, any of those sorts of things. And you have to look at impacts on human equity, on environmental justice, on human scale design. So this is a really interesting challenge, and it's something that is really hard to get, and only about 100 buildings in the world are trying to pursue. But the problem is this certification doesn't work especially well in urban settings for taller buildings, just because of the nature of how it's judged. And so they're kind of looking, the International Living Building Institute is trying to figure out how you can focus on the district rather than the building itself. So those are the 3 main building rating systems, and we want you to kind of take a look at some of the buildings in your area and see how they relate to those 3 categories. So we're going to take a quick break from us talking because we don't want to be doing that the whole time, and we have an activity for you. So I think we're going to have you take 10 minutes and look for a building in your community with one of those 3 energy certifications. And we want you to put up a slide that answers find a picture of it, put that up, and answer what kind of innovations or technologies does your building use, and what might it have missed, what could it be doing better. So I believe Rob is going to share a link to the slide template that we want you to use. And then just have at it. Look for look for an awesome building in your city, and we want to see what you come up with.
Yeah, this is also a good opportunity if you guys have any questions. Karen and I are happy to answer those. But I did post a link, so if you look into the GoToWebinar box or side panel, there should be a chat box. And I just sent a link over there. Anybody with that link should be able to edit it, or should be able to open and view this. And I see a couple of you are already joining. So as Karen mentioned, what we're hoping you can do is take a look at some buildings in your community, add more slides in this deck if you need to. I put an example in here of the building that I'm actually sitting in right now. This is the Y2E2, or also better known, or fully named the Yang and Yamazaki Energy and Environment Building at Stanford's campus. And it earned a LEED Platinum for operations and maintenance about 2 years ago, even though the building was built about 8 years ago. And I listed here some of the features. I found an article online that the campus news agency had written about the building to get some of the cool features that it's got. And I know Brittany said that Smith has a living building. Maybe that's a really good example for something. And she's already put it up here. But yeah, also, if you've got any questions, feel free to send them over, and Karen and I are happy to answer those while you guys kind of do some research on your own. See some cool buildings here. We've got a library in Beaufort, Georgia. Is that somewhere near Georgia Tech, or is that a different place altogether? And the SFPUC, that's a great building. Really great case study too. Feel free if you to take a look at what other folks are doing too once you've kind of gotten a start on your own.
Muted. Unmuted.
I have to say that I'm just looking through all the buildings that you guys are finding and posting, and I'm very, very impressed with the diversity here. Everything from small office buildings to some big campus buildings, an elementary school, uh, some really interesting. What's most marked about that is the diversity of what a sustainable building can look like. For so long in the industry, there was kind of this stigma about image that a sustainable building, by definition, looked very different. And if you look at the pictures that everybody's been sharing, that's definitely not the case. They go from this building here at Ohio State that looks like it could be anywhere on the campus to some very cool architecture. So this is awesome, the diversity. Let's take about 3 or 4 more minutes to put down some notes about the buildings that you guys have found. I know it's not a whole lot of time. And then for 2 or 3 of these, we'd like to ask if you've got a microphone, we're going to have some people share what they found and kind of share some of the features, the technologies, and some of the design interventions that made these buildings actually be able to achieve the rating systems. So we'll pick a couple to ask. If you've got a microphone, we'd love to have you talk. And if yeah, so just be prepared for that in a minute or two here. All right. You guys have done an awesome job of finding some really cool buildings and some great information. So I want to bring it back and share a little bit. If you've got some other things you're still dropping in, go ahead and finish up. And I encourage you offline when the session's over to kind of take a look at the information that your peers found. But just after taking a quick look over some of them here, I'm going to ask first, whoever is the did the Hamilton Mill Library from Georgia. Do you have a microphone? Are you able to share a little bit about that building? If you are, you can raise your hand and I'll go ahead and unmute you. If you don't have a microphone, send me a message and just let me know that as well. Looking for anyone. Can't find the chat. Okay, do you have? But don't have a microphone. Okay, no problem. Thanks for the note. Google Slides works well to share notes as well. I encourage everybody to take a look. I've been watching what you've been posting here on the library. Some really interesting technologies and a great. To me, I love public spaces that are also sustainable buildings because it's a great educational mission. And this building here, the Golden Gate, 525 Golden Gate Avenue, the SFPUC headquarters, is another great example of that. Matthew, do you have a microphone today? I unmuted you, Matt. If you've got, yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this building?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'm in a coffee shop, so it might be a little background noise.
Yeah, that's no problem. We can hear you.
Yeah, I'll try to explain a little bit. I actually just came from there from work. But yeah, it's an awesome building. I work in there. It's right in the Civic Center, so it's like immediately next to City Hall. It's got a great view, besides the fact. But it's also just a beautiful building. But some of the cool features that I saw when I went on a tour of it is that it has a solar array on the top. It actually has two solar arrays. One's tilted at about 30 degrees and the other is flat. And it outputs about 7% of the building's energy needs per year. It also has wind turbines that don't work as well, but they're still there and they're still pretty cool to look at. And lastly, the thing that I thought was the coolest thing about it was the wastewater treatment that I actually went on a tour yesterday, and they call it the Live Gene. And basically, they take all the water out of the building from all the sinks, the showers, the toilets, and everything like that, and they filter all the solid waste out. And then they have these little cool like wetland gardens outside that have various sized rocks that they pump the water through. I think I said 34 times, and over about a time period of about 48 hours, they do that, and then they send it back up, all this reclaimed water back up to toilets and stuff in the building, and they actually have too much water that they know they don't have anything to do with it, so they have to end up dumping in the sewer in a drought in California, which kind of sucks. So they've been talking about perhaps expanding, making an eco district that in the Civic Center that you can share water. But yeah, that was the coolest thing I thought about the building, and it's also LEED Platinum certified.
Excellent. All right, thanks, Matthew. I'm going to go ahead and meet you again. Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting example of that nexus between energy and water, which you may have heard that term energy-water nexus usually applied at a much larger scale. This building's a great example of how that comes into play even at a single building. And I wanted Matthew to share this because I actually live local to San Francisco as well. This is cited all the time in really prospective, really advanced thinking on buildings, both in terms of energy and in terms of water. While we're mostly going to focus on energy, I definitely encourage you guys, as you're looking at these systems, as you're looking at these buildings, to think about the non-energy sustainability components as well. I saw a couple down here that were Living Building Challenge certified buildings, so I wanted to grab one of those and have someone. Oops, I'm in the have one of those get shared here. Where was it? These were me. Was it this one? No. This is the one I was looking for. The Center for Sustainable Landscapes in Pittsburgh. Who's been working on this one here? The Phipps Conservatory. It shows up as anonymous elephant for me. Troy, do you have a microphone? I will unmute you if you do. We can hear you, Troy, if you're.
Yeah, am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. Go for it. You want to tell?
Okay. So the Center for Sustainable Landscapes, um, one second.
No problem. Didn't mean to necessarily put you too much on the spot there.
All right, so this is about a mile from me at Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh. Um, just as a preface, I go to the University of Pittsburgh, so it's pretty close. And I've toured it a few times. It's a cool place to take people, whether it's going by yourself or like with an ESW group, which we've done a couple times. Um, it's close and it's free, and there's tours all the time. They brag a lot about LEED Platinum and being Living Building Challenge certified. Got all their pedals recently. Um, so under sustainable features, I put everything they had on their website. But one thing I don't think I have on there is the little pond in the picture there is their water treatment system, and it's supposed to mimic a passive treatment system. Now they do have some aeration and a small um, treatment system inside behind that, um, but most of it happens outside and sort of runs down that hillside to clean water that is both from the building, and all the rainwater that falls on there is treated on site. Now, because of PA laws, they can't use that water for drinking water inside, even though it's past normal standards for drinking water. They can use it for other stuff, mostly toilets inside, and for some watering of vegetation. Additionally, there's a vertical axis wind turbine on that campus. They weren't allowed to make it as big as they wanted because of some Pittsburgh ordinances, but it's still pretty cool to have. Doesn't generate as much electricity as they want, but still some of it offsets something. They do have large solar arrays on the hillside behind that picture. Again, a lot of the cool stuff is off picture, but this is the best picture. The glass building off to the side is Phipps Conservatory, which is enormous. Anyway, they use some sustainable building materials. The coolest one, definitely, maybe not the thing that saves environment, but the coolest one is definitely the reclaimed exterior from Western PA Barnes. It just has a really, really cool look that's older, that contrasts with like the newer, sleeker architecture. On top, they have a garden with all usable, edible plants. I could sort of go on. I don't know, just everything about this building is beautiful. It like breathes. It's really organic.
Yeah, no, this is great, and thanks for
It's
sharing,
basically a
Troy.
freaking organism. It's cool.
Yeah, no, it looks
Yeah.
awesome. I'm going to go ahead and mute you again here. I wanted to highlight a couple more things in the list that Troy mentioned, namely, first, the top bullet point here, the outside-in passive-first strategy. We'll talk a lot more about passive versus active systems in later weeks, but the idea of thinking first about how can we prevent the even need to use energy before we try and condition the space. And considering that Pittsburgh is not exactly the mildest climate in the country, the fact that this bottom point here, the atrium, is not mechanically heated or cooled. They just use a lot of passive strategies, some thermal mass, really high performance windows and shading to maintain comfort even in wintertime. Really cool design. This must be a really cool building. All that green space from an energy perspective doubles to help mediate the temperature around the building, and also for any space that might be underneath those green roofs to help keep heat out of there as well, or heat in the winter when you want it. So this is a really cool example. And I wish we had time to go through all of them because you guys did find some amazing buildings. So like I said, please do look over this afterwards. You will always have access to this to keep going back and taking a look. One thing that I didn't notice among the diversity of buildings that we had was a house. And we can debate whether or not houses are actually that energy efficient in the grand scheme of an urban setting or not. But I do want to draw attention to personal bias, a project that I actually was the construction manager for. This was the Stanford University entry to the Solar Decathlon competition, which pushes students to build design and build a net zero energy house. So this was our entry in 2013. It now has been reconstructed at our biological preserve here on campus. So this is a picture of it in its final location. And this building was certified under a different rating system. It's called the Greenpoint rating system, which is much more focused on single-family houses about a year ago. So just an example of what a green home can look like, certainly not the only one. And if you're interested in more of sort of net zero home design, we'll talk about tiny houses later and net zero houses a little bit more. But you can also check out some of the entries from the Solar Decathlon as well from past competitions. Great. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and take us back to the slides here and draw the conversation sort of up a level a little bit. And I want to take a step back and ask about or talk about why we actually care about energy efficiency. Karen did a nice job of taking us through where we use energy in buildings, how some of our more industry-driven efforts are helping us understand and control where we use energy. But it's a question I like to ask about, why do we actually care about this whole topic of energy efficiency? And it may seem obvious. It may seem like, well, there are a lot of reasons we want to save energy, perhaps mostly because we use a lot of it. When you talk about the life cycle impact of a building, energy during operation of the building is by far the greatest use. This chart here is from a software program that Autodesk offers to do a life cycle assessment of products of buildings. And you can see here under sort of an average energy use scenario, oops, did not mean to go to the next slide already. Let's go back here. 83% of the life cycle impact of a building is in its operational phase, and the majority of that, somewhere around 90% of the operational impact, is just from energy consumption. Even as we get to a net zero energy building, which a couple of the projects that were in our slide deck talked about net zero, meaning that all of the energy is generated on site for the building, there's even still some operational impact and some impact from maintaining the energy systems that provide electricity, heating, and cooling to the building. So we use a lot of it, and that translates when we talk about the impacts that we actually care about to a really high global warming impact, to a really high carbon dioxide equivalent. If we look here at the United States carbon emissions and energy consumption, about 38.4% of our carbon emissions, about 40%, come from electric power, and that's all within buildings, or pretty much exclusively within buildings. The electricity attributable to industrial and transportation emissions, including the electricity that those may consume, are not included in this 40% number. And that's actually pretty consistent across the world. It's about 35 to 40% of global carbon emissions that originate from buildings, from our built environment. And based on the sources of energy that we use, in this case, the U.S. is still pretty heavily coal-based across most of the country. That generates a lot of that emissions. If we think about it on a per citizen or per household level, Karen talked about some of those energy main sources of energy consumption. But as an individual, looking at sort of the average U.S. person's life cycle footprint, about 30% of your own energy use comes directly from, or your own footprint, comes from your home energy use. So it's definitely something that we care about, that we want to think about. And it's also something where that impact is changing rapidly. As you can see here on the left part of the screen, over the last 20, 30 years, the share of our energy that comes from very carbon-intense sources, coal and natural gas, has been declining. Natural gas has been growing a bit, but it actually replaces a lot more carbon-intensive generation in coal across most of the country. And the fraction of renewable energy that we're using is steadily increasing. The chart on the right shows how our renewable generating capacity has increased in just the U.S. Most notably, the wind. If I were to take this wind chart back another 20 years, you would see what looks like a hockey stick type growth in wind adoption. And in the last 5 years, solar has started to take that as well. This is projecting out from the Energy Information Administration what they believe our share of renewable energy will be by 2040. There are industry predictions that have this ramping up at a much, much higher rate. The reason I share this is because it poses an interesting question that if one of the main drivers of energy efficiency is reduced carbon emissions and reduced global warming, well, what happens as we adopt all of these renewable energies? And in fact, if we move to a renewable, decarbonized electricity future, do we actually care about energy efficiency? And this is a question that I like to pose pretty much anytime I give a talk or a class on sustainable design, sustainable architecture, and energy efficiency, because it really causes us to think about, well, what are we actually doing? What we care about at the end of the day is not really the energy itself, but what it does for us, the lighting, the heating, the cooling, the other uses that we have within a building. And so the efficiency right now seems like a means to get us to a lower carbon future. And certainly that's true. Back up one step. Certainly that's true that that energy is helping us reduce our emissions impact. But reducing energy also has other side effects, that it helps us reduce other impacts that aren't just going to be attributable to global warming. And so I mentioned solar before and the rapid adoption of solar. There are a lot of utility industry sources who are suggesting that solar combined with batteries, especially lithium-ion batteries, are going to be kind of the biggest wave of new technology that's going to push us really towards that renewable future. Wind is great, but wind is not available everywhere. Sun is available pretty much everywhere. So even in that future where we have 100% solar energy potentially, or solar and batteries, some combination thereof, I wanted to think about, well, what are some of the other impacts that reducing our energy use would have? And this is a simple block diagram of how to produce a polysilicon solar panel. If you're interested in this and digging into all of the impacts that this kind of process has, little plug here, we also teach a life cycle assessment short course. It'll probably be sometime around January or February, so look out for that and sign up. But if we just take a look at some of these engineering processes, what we can see is that of these sort of inputs, this magnesium and silicon, the hydrochloric acid, and some of the gases that we have to use, there are actually a whole lot of things that are happening throughout this process of making these solar panels. We've got mining and purification of metals, which has a huge social and environmental impact, and not just in terms of pollution, but in terms of disturbing natural habitat to get these materials. Potential toxicity from acid runoff from using hydrochloric acid and other sources in the etching of solar panels. Gases that are produced during that process that can be toxic for the workers or also just to the atmosphere in general. And then kind of the one that gets a little bit lost in here, this pyrolysis process uses hydrogen, which can either come from the gas, but also sometimes needs sources that today are often methane or fossil fuels. So we're now at the point where solar panels produce more energy over their lifetime than they consume, and more their emissions negative, meaning that the emissions consumed in this process from a global warming perspective are offset by the production. At the same time, we still have all of these other effects that kind of get swept under the rug, but as we get higher and higher penetrations of renewable power, will become a bigger and bigger issue that we'll start to talk about and hear about a lot more. And so even in this future, if we reduce our energy, we're reducing some of these other negative impacts. The other issue is definitely cost. On that process to where we get to that 100% renewable future, one of the major things is it will cost a lot of money. We need to change a lot of our infrastructure in order to be able to handle this on a societal and a global level. And if we look at the cost, the life cycle cost of different interventions, pretty much all of the building technologies, which I've circled here in green, with the exception of some really heavy air conditioning, heating, and ventilation upgrades, all of them are not only some of the cheapest things we can do, but this negative value means that they actually produce money, they save money over their lifetime, rather than over here we see some of our renewable technologies, solar, concentrated solar power, still costing money. And this chart's a couple years out of date. There have been some really good advances in technology and in economics that have brought solar and some of the other renewable technologies to be more cost competitive. But it still looks more like this today, if I were to graph it, where all of our efficiency technologies to help get us to reducing our carbon are still the cheapest things that we can do. So even if it's a short-term game, this is a really important aspect that we want to care about. And even if it is all of that solar plus batteries, it makes financial sense to do energy efficiency. Some of you may have seen the announcement, I think 2 weeks ago now, from Tesla, that they're going to start producing home storage, home energy storage, batteries that you can buy and pair with your solar panel. And there's a lot of buzz that, okay, this is going to allow everybody to go off the grid because Tesla's targeting some really aggressive cost numbers for that. Well, we already talked a little bit about the life cycle impact, not just the emissions, but the acidity. And trust me, lithium-ion batteries have some of those issues as well. But it's also very costly to do that. And a nice chart here from the Rocky Mountain Institute shows us that for these 5 cities that they looked at, which kind of span the entirety of the country, if you don't do what they're calling here demand-side improvement, that's their way of saying energy efficiency, if you don't do energy efficiency, in most areas, you're spending about twice as much to get that off-grid system. So this is looking at solar plus batteries with the dark green on the left, and then solar plus batteries with some aggressive energy efficiency implementation. So those red arrows show you just how much energy efficiency would save from your pocket just by doing that. This is total cost of your system to be off the grid for the average consumer in those areas. And then last sort of, if I haven't convinced you, well, it's now legally required for utilities to do energy efficiency in most states in the country. As you can see here, the green states have energy efficiency standards on the books, meaning that either new buildings have to comply with energy efficient regulations, or utilities in many cases are required to provide money for energy efficient improvements for both new and existing projects. If we look at the number of utility customers that are influenced by these laws, it's over 2/3 of customers in this country. So 2/3 of individuals are influenced by energy efficiency laws today. As is noted here, we've got a couple of pockets that sort of line up with regions here. Well, they do line up with regions as far as where efficiency laws aren't on the books. I would like to point out, because when I've shown this chart before, some people immediately say, well, there's a political divide there. Actually, many of the laws in these green states were passed under either bipartisan legislature or Republican-led legislature. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I like the Northeast, actually, because Vermont has some of the most aggressive energy efficiency laws in the country, and its neighbor, New Hampshire, does not. So last thing here, when we talk about those laws, they actually work. The laws, as Karen showed before, have helped us to – the policies, the incentives, the new technology has helped us to sort of stabilize our energy consumption. And in this chart, we really see that as a per capita energy breakdown. The state of California has led in energy efficiency regulations since the 70s, when the OPEC oil crisis really put a crunch on utility energy pricing. And since those laws were enacted in California, we have more or less stayed static in the amount of energy per person that we use, while there's been an increasing trend until the last decade throughout the country. Most of the laws that California has passed, it's worth noting, have propagated to other states as well, or to the entire country. So whereas Energy Star wasn't a program nationally until the mid-1990s, California was implementing appliance standards starting in the 1970s as part of its aggressive energy efficiency measures. So there's a real reason to do this, and backing up to the biggest context that I could possibly think of, there's a really global need for thinking about energy efficiency. Not just in our own country, which, as you can see here, we in the United States are some of the worst energy hogs in the world, which probably a lot of you are aware of. We in Canada, per household, use a lot more than even our nearest neighbor, Australia. And you can see part of that is that we have big houses down here on the bottom. But what's interesting is that, yes, there are a lot of developed countries in this chart, but if you look down here at the left at Nigeria, India, China, Mexico, Brazil, and Russia, they use 1/4 to 1/20th, in the case of Nigeria, of what we Americans use on a yearly basis. The reason that we need to think about efficiency is not just because we look bad compared to all of the rest of the world, but because pretty soon the rest of the world is going to look like us if we're not careful. And there are a lot of geopolitical and social issues that I'm not addressing here, so I do want to just make a note that, yes, I realize there are a lot of north, south, east, west technology transfer and cultural imposition issues to deal with, but the result is we're all on this earth together, and if the rates of urbanization, the rates of energy consumption start to approach what America and parts of Europe, because Denmark actually is not the greatest in terms of energy consumption either, use, we're going to have a big issue with the amount of energy that the world is consuming. So we see here, I took the case of China because that's the most publicized one today. China's urbanizing at an increasing rate and an unprecedented rate. In 2012, they crossed the boundary where 50% of the population is now urban as opposed to rural, and that had never happened in the country previously. And what that means is as people move into the city, as you can see in this chart on the left, their energy consumption tends to jump substantially, and as household income increases, energy consumption tends to follow as well. So energy efficiency is not just something we need to care about, but also something that as the world approaches the standard of living that Europe and America have enjoyed for much longer, there's growth in energy consumption that rightly should come with that. And we just need to understand how to manage that without reducing or impairing the standard of living increases as well. So that last 15 minutes, I think, was a lot. It is exactly 9 o'clock, and I do want to respect that this class is meant to end at 9 o'clock, since some of you may have commitments to run off to. Just as a final note for next week, we'll be in the same time, same place. Actually, we'll be starting a half an hour earlier, not with the lecture, but with the discussion. So if you want to be here just for the lecture, 8 o'clock is the right time to join us. 7:30 Eastern if you want to just discuss or have some questions. And Karen will be talking about existing buildings and doing some audits and retrofits. There is some reading for the week that will be linked on the syllabus in the Google Drive. If we can post it in the Drive, we will, with all of the readings. And like I've said at the beginning, if you missed any of the class, if you came in late, I guess it doesn't help if you had to leave early, but we do post these. We will be posting these and sharing links for you. With that, thanks again for joining us for the first week. We hope to see everybody here next week. If you have some additional questions or things that you wanted to mention or discuss, a couple of us, I believe, can stick around for a few minutes. But otherwise, you're free to go enjoy what's left of your evening.
Yep, as Rob said, I will be sticking around for like at least another 10 minutes, although I know Rob has to run, so I'll let him